Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. I'm your host, Brad Bell, the William J. Conity Professor of Strategic Human Resources and also the Director of the Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies, or CARS as we like to call it, in the ILR School at Cornell. Today we're going to be discussing the future of leadership pipelines, rethinking succession in the digital era, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Penelope Sir, who is Vice President of Global Talent at Eastman. This is our kickoff keynote for our Future Ready Workforce series, and today's program is brought to you through a production partnership between the ILR School, the Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies, and Eastman. Viewers, we're very interested in hearing from you today, and we'll take your questions either as we go throughout our discussion or at the end of today's session. So please submit your questions as you have them in the chat. Also, keep an eye on the chat for valuable resources, tools, and useful links. Penelope, it's great to have you with us today. And before diving in, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your background and your experience as a talent leader.
Oh, thank you, Brad, for having me. It's such a pleasure. I started my career in HR at L'Oreal in US manufacturing, and then I pivoted to focus on learning and development, big passion for it. Then I moved on to talent management, even a bigger passion of mine within America's scope. I then switched focus to go on to retail and joined Centric Brands. Then I went to Dick's Sporting Goods, and I found my home here at Eastman almost 3 years ago, where I lead recruitment, performance management, learning and development, and culture.
Well, great. I'm sure having worked in talent management for almost 2 decades, you've seen a lot and have seen the world of work and the workforce itself evolve quite a bit, particularly over the last couple of years where it seems like change and disruption has really become the new normal. At the same time, my sense at least is that maybe our succession planning processes haven't kind of kept speed or haven't evolved as much as the world around us. So what is your view, and is your view that kind of succession planning really needs to change and adapt to today's environment?
Well, we're doing our best to keeping speed, right? So you're right, over the last 2 decades, things have changed. Maybe not fast enough, but succession planning used to happen behind closed doors. It was designed for stability of the business and for long tenures. I really think that today's workforce expects visibility into opportunities. They expect their development to be taken into consideration and some decision criteria. So when people cannot see how leadership is making those decisions about their own career, right, they assume bias and favoritism. And the feedback that we get in employee cultures and culture surveys all the time is, well, it all falls into a black box. So the results of this is, it's unfortunate, but it's disengagement, increasingly voluntary exits of high performers and young talent. I really believe that opacity, right, around talent decisions that used to be tolerated, in today's environment, we can't do it. It actively erodes trust.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And your observations align with some recent work that we've done within our center around the future of work. And one of the key themes that emerged in that work was really this kind of shift in employee expectations from a kind of standardized, psychological contract with their organizations to really wanting that more individualized contract, in particular wanting a lot more transparency around kind of growth opportunities, around opportunities for mobility within the organization. And I think a lot of this, to your point, is being driven by the need for them to stay kind of current in this world that's constantly changing around us and to make sure that their skills are really being future-proofed, so to speak. So if the goal is to create this more transparent and open succession process, one that can really lead to higher levels of engagement and trust, in your view, what really needs to change perhaps around how we've traditionally thought about or approached succession planning?
Yeah, Brad, the traditional black box succession model is failing, right? I believe most of our organizations face structural problems, leadership pipelines built on managers' nomination rather than evidence, limited visibility into the skills that we need for future roles. What we need to keep in mind is with that world evolving so fast, right? The skills that were highly prized in the past for success are certainly not the same as we need for tomorrow's roles.
Well, I think you just raised a number of really important points there. So I'd love to dig into them each in a little bit more detail because I think our audience would appreciate that as well. So maybe let's start with the first one, which is, our leadership pipelines are often based on managerial nomination, the tap on the shoulder, as opposed to maybe really solid evidence. So why is this a problem and how do we fix it from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, we have to rely more heavily on evidence-based talent assessments. We are getting much more sophisticated, right, in talent and how we look at talent within the structure of our organization. And we need to use structured tools such as leadership assessment, behavioral interviews are coming into place much more too. We're getting so much better, some performance data, of course, and potential indicators rather than informal nomination, that tap on the shoulder that you were just talking about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've always found it interesting that when I talk to a lot of companies and I ask them about the rigor of their processes, they'll often highlight their 9-box tool, or in some cases their 16-box or 25-box tool. And at the end of the day, that is still largely a subjective process. So, you mentioned a few examples there, but from your perspective, what are some of the really best tools that we can be using to come up with better evidence-based identification of future leaders?
Well, I think there's 3 elements that are very important in my opinion, right? So it's that competency architecture, evidence-based assessment, and strategic talent mapping. I already talked about the importance of those evidence-based assessments. So I'll focus on the importance of what we call competency architecture and strategic talent mapping. Organization must define for me a set of leadership capabilities clearly, right? Not 162 of them, but simple, clear leadership capabilities. They need to be defined clearly for your organization and talked about on a regular basis and be part of our performance management system. And then we need to link them to our business strategy. And what I mean by that is they cannot be static, right? So those assessments that we do need to take into consideration that the business is evolving and the skills that we need to provide need to evolve also. For example, we need to focus on digital fluency, right? Cross-functional collaboration. Having a global mindset is so important in global organization. We cannot just be stuck in the way we've always done the things across all the cultures. And one very important element today, and that's why we're here too, is we need to lead with teams that are ready to embrace AI in everything they do.
You kind of joked about it, but the list of 162 competencies. But I've certainly seen a lot of organizations that feel like they need to be so comprehensive that they develop this laundry list of leadership competencies that at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like anybody, even the people that develop them, probably can remember what's on the list. So how do we kind of resist that urge to kind of throw everything in the kitchen sink in there, but to really have a core kind of defined list from your perspective?
Oh, Brad, I've been through that story before. So much work, right? From the HR teams and the business leaders to define those long lists of skills. And we debate and we iterate and we do it over again. And we assess each and every one of them against those very static criteria. And it never gets us really far, right? It becomes so complex, so heavy, so over-engineered that it becomes another Excel document on somebody's laptop that we all tend to forget about. So one thought here would be to leverage AI to help us create skills architectures that an AI agent, for example, can update as the business and the skills that are required evolve with time, right? I think this would be a phenomenal project, Brad, for some of the eager students that you have in your courses to help us, really just solve for that problem.
Well, I would certainly agree that most of my students probably are much more expert at AI than I am, but I think you raise a great point too there that we're going to come back to later in today's discussion, which is I think we often view AI as a real challenge that we need to deal with, but I think it can also be part of the solution. So I'd love to come back and delve into that with you further in a little bit. But the other piece that you said is really critical is this idea of strategic talent mapping. So can you talk a little bit about what you mean exactly by that?
Well, we're getting much better at mapping internal talent, and I insist on internal talent, against future leadership roles, right? And openly communicating development pathways so that employees understand how to progress.
That makes a lot of sense. And, just to that point, I remember one company I worked with really wanted to have that future-oriented perspective. So they actually went to create two different sets of competencies for leaders, which were, what do leaders really need today to be successful, but what are they going to need maybe 5, 7 years from now? So some of that, obviously, we're maybe guessing at what's going to be important in the future because none of us have a crystal ball, but I think it reinforces that point of looking ahead, which you just named. So, as you kind of think about this and this idea of strategic talent mapping, I think an important part of that is transparency in that process. So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
So it moves above just transparency, right? At a minimum, most of us in all the organization that I've seen and all the conversation I had with peers, right, have implemented mid-year conversations. So it's not just at one point during the year, at the end of the year, that you address any skills gap that you have with your employees. So most of us have those mid-year conversations. Some run quarterly in some of our internal businesses, right, to assess where employees are at mid-year against the goals that they have set early. We have had multiple conversations with my teams about, well, we set up goals in January, but now with the evolution of the business, the skills that we need are going to be slightly different, and we need to adjust. The business is different, the skills required are different too. So I think having those ongoing conversation and having those mid-year conversation are great opportunities to calibrate the expectations of leaders, the expectation of the business with the skills that employees have. And it can infer some stronger development plan or readjustment of some of those goals through the year.
Mm-hmm. And Penelope, I mean, from your standpoint, what do you see as the role of the employee themselves in this process? I think there's this growing trend I've noticed where this idea of employees really taking ownership of their own careers and their own kind of career development. I think sometimes that's viewed as organizations passing the buck to employees in terms of kind of making it their responsibility. But it does seem like employees really need to be more active participants as opposed to passive recipients of a lot of this.
Well, Brad, you and I had that conversation on the side, right? Your career belongs to you. The speed to your career belongs to you. Of course, there's a parameter of the jobs that you have, the goals that you have, the performance that you have, but it's very difficult to do succession planning without starting with the employee at the center. I think people's lives change. HR is not a mind reader. People managers are not mind readers either. And so every conversation about succession planning or your aspirations for the next role needs to start with the employee. And so if you have the opportunity within your organization, then you must fill up your talent profiles, right? So the database, I want to say, that HR uses is not a conversation. It needs to be written somewhere. So clearly state what your skills are, what your aspirations are, where you want to go, how you're developing, what are your development plans, how are you growing from where you are today towards that next role or becoming even better as a SME, a subject matter expert in your current role. And so the conversation, in my opinion, need to always start with, what do I want to do when I grow up? And then what skills do I need to have in order to attain that next role? And that's where, Brad, those conversations around development plans for me are absolutely critical, because your manager and your HR partners can help you calibrate if you're going in the right direction, and also give you feedback on, hey, your aspirations are offset, or hey, you need to perform effectively in this role that you have today before you can aspire to something else. So I see the critical role and the start of that conversation about career and succession plan as being totally owned by the employee. And anecdotally, I always cite that example to say in my own career, there are moments in my life where I didn't take that next big role because in my life, there were events that were happening that were preventing me from being able to focus on the job itself. I was much better off going through a divorce, right? At staying in my current role and owning those skills and performing effectively in that role than in a moment of turmoil of life in general. I was not able to learn the new skill, learn a new job, learn a new team, and go to another country. I wasn't able to do that at the time. So I needed to communicate that clearly to my leadership team to say, hey, this year, folks, I'm very happy to be doing my job to the best of my abilities, but I do not have what it takes to invest in my career or to invest in that next step in the next 6 months because of my personal circumstances. We are not mind readers in HR. Your managers are not mind readers. We don't know what's going on in your life and when you have the time or the mental capacity to focus on that next job. So, to make a long story short here, Brad, the conversation really needs to start with the employee at the center.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think sometimes we lose sight of that and think of as employees as just these kind of cogs in a machine, but everybody's different. Everybody, as you said, goes through different challenges in their lives. So really kind of understanding where employees are at that point in time and making sure that it's aligned with their aspirations, their bandwidth, their capabilities, capacity at that time is a really important point for us to remember. Maybe I'll take one of the questions that's come in. I think it's a good one to hit on now. It's from Beverly. She kind of asks, we were talking earlier about the criteria that we use to really map kind of leader competencies. From your perspective, should those same criteria be used for any employee, or do we really want to have a separate set of competencies for leaders specifically? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think every employee in our organization start by being a leader of themselves. And so I would be a big proponent to say that the leadership competency within the organization should be the same across the board. We can debate that ad nauseum, but first and foremost, you lead yourself and should be able to respond, quote unquote, or to be how can I say that? You should be able to behave as a leader in everything you do. Mm-hmm. And so, in my opinion, the competency and the competency framework should be identical, whether you're an individual contributor, you lead others, or you lead big organization. We should all beat by the same drum. And to the point we were making earlier, Brad, the simpler the better. Right? It provides clarity, it provides clear definition, it provides clear behaviors for the entire organization. And if you start having, multiple different layers of competencies and so on and so forth, it dilutes the dialogue completely within the organization.
Yeah, I think your view is consistent with what I've observed working with different organizations, where increasingly we're talking about leadership across all employees. That may look differently depending on their role, their level, but exhibiting leadership and whatever that looks like in their particular circumstance. And I think the other benefit that we get when we have a more consistent framework is that then we can thread it through things like, as we think about talent acquisition, as we think about performance management, it threads through everything that we're doing in HR, as opposed to just kind of thinking about leadership in this, one little box around succession planning. And I think that creates a much more integrated and hopefully much more impactful process. So maybe coming back to a point that you made earlier, which I think is a really important one, is this idea of how do we make our succession planning process more agile, more nimble? And I think that you highlighted the traditional maybe approach of setting annual goals and meeting with our managers at the end of the year. That's probably much too rigid for today's world. But how else, or other thoughts do you have? How can we make succession planning more agile in today's environment?
So we're dabbling in it. I haven't seen anybody do it in a fantastic way yet, but we're trying, right? And I think that we can use AI in succession planning. But in order to do that, we need three key elements: strong talent data, right? So to go back to those employee profiles, I think that's one point of data that's extremely important. We need that, well, we talked about it, right? That strong and clear leadership competency framework. Here at Eastman, we have 12 competencies, and they're very clear and clearly defined for the entire organization. And then we need a responsible governance. AI can surface some insights and identify potential, but it only works, right, if the organization has defined what leadership looks like and has the right safeguard to ensure that level of fairness. So what I am looking forward to is to, for example, right, to leverage AI in order to build suggested career roadmaps, for example. And we could base them on some of our previous leaders or current leaders' experience. And the magic can truly happen, right, and impact when you can only look at the pathways, but also integrate some business challenge or some innovation, and you can include that in that data so that your AI tool can build your talent pools to face new challenges. AI systems can unintentionally, right, replicate bias from historical data. And that's something we hear over and over. But I'm biased, right? I'm just human, so I'm biased as well. I think our companies need to have some safeguards, like policies around the AI use, the same way we have policies around everything we do within an organization. But what needs to include, right, is transparency around how the models are working. And definitely what we need is a strong oversight from the HR and from the legal teams and regular audits to ensure that the system is producing fair outcomes. I think AI models can help us model plans. They can help us surface some talent that we may have overlooked, have not seen, right? It can inform some talent decision with strong data analysis, but it will never, never, ever replace human judgment, right? From your strong HR partners, from your leaders, from those conversations, from that collaboration of both, and again, with the employee in the middle of those conversations. We've made what made you successful in the years 2000, right, is not the same at what's going to make you successful in 2030. And I wish I had that crystal ball you were talking about earlier, Brad, because I wish I knew what's going to make me successful, in 4, 5, 10 years. But this world that has becoming increasingly volatile and uncertain requires for every one of us to becoming agile, to take risk, to have that ability to pivot and the adaptability to adapt to those changes. And what's most needed today is how to becoming a leader of tomorrow is that ability that we're going to have to adapt to the changes around us. And I hear a lot of my colleagues and peers and friends and even children being really worried about AI in general. I've decided to take a different stance and see what it can do for me rather than against me. So we were talking about, in the future of work, what succession planning is going to look like, right? I think succession planning cannot be a once a year, just HR exercise, or now we're talking about succession planning. We have to be a lot more agile and adapt to the business that we're in. And we have to have a continuous system to connect the skills, the development, those new opportunities created by a business that is very volatile with new technology to help us do better and faster. AI can help us, but it's never going to replace human judgment, in my opinion, Brad.
I couldn't agree more. I think making sure that the humans remain in the loop on important, employee decisions, whether it's, promotion, pay, things like that, hiring. I think that's important that we continue to maintain oversight there. Important point you raised around AI is its dependence on really good data, right? I think the potential is this ability to maybe pull in a bunch of data on employees, much more rich profiles of employees, and to your point, may help us to identify maybe employees that we in the past would have overlooked in the succession planning process or may not have been on our radar screens. But that data piece to me seems like maybe one of the biggest hurdles for organizations, because currently it seems like that data is spread across a bunch of different systems that often aren't integrated, aren't talking to one another. The data itself might have its own quality issues. So how do we maybe overcome that? Or, do you agree that the data is maybe where we need to focus our attention to really kind of move this forward?
Yes, and I want to start with the employee data. And so a lot of our system, like you've mentioned, right, they're a little bit everywhere in every single organization I've been to. We're trying to clean that data up. But that data starts with the employee themselves. And so I feel that my responsibility as an employee is to make sure that the data that I put into the HR system that I have, good, bad, or indifferent, that data, I need to put it in. I need to make sure that it is clear, right? I need to update my work experience. I need to update my skills too. There's links, for example, in our organization today, there's links where I don't have to put some of the learning activities or some of the new skills that I have acquired through the LMS system, our internal learning teams. I don't have to put that into the system because it will be done automatically. Sometimes well, sometimes not so well. But anyhow, there are a bunch of skills that you acquire outside of your day-to-day, right? There's a bunch of skills that you acquire by having interactions with your network, by presenting somewhere else, by attending a conference. And those are just somewhere, right, in the world. You know what those skills are. I don't know what those skills are if you don't put them into your talent profile within your organization. Or even if you don't have a talent profile in your organization, if you're not that sophisticated, you need to have that conversation with your manager and with your HR partners to say, hey, I've learned this, and now I'm skilled at this. I want to be put on a project where I can sharpen that skill set. But that information starts for me, and it's so important. It starts with the employee at the heart of all those conversations. It's not just there in limbo.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point, and again highlights the important and active role that employees should be playing in the process, which you highlighted earlier. So a couple of good questions come in, so maybe we'll tackle a few of these. One from Geraldine. I mean, you talked about one of the concerns we often have with AI is this idea of bias or perpetuating existing biases. So the question is maybe a little bit broader around, how should we consider inclusion, or how do we think about inclusion as part of the succession planning process? Any thoughts or opinions on kind of where that fits?
So repeat the question for me, Brad.
So the basic question is, how do you recommend or consider inclusion as part of succession planning? And maybe what I've observed Penelope, working across different companies, is I found some companies take what I would consider a very inclusive approach to succession planning, where everybody is considered as a potential leader, is evaluated, is looked at as, in terms of their potential for growth. Other organizations I found, I would say maybe a much more exclusive approach where, hey, we're just focusing on the top cadre of leaders, or we're just focusing on these critical talent segments within our organization, whatever they might be. So I guess from your opinion, should we try to kind of involve everybody in the process, or do we take a more kind of targeted, narrow approach as we think about succession planning?
No, we need to do succession. Well, I say no, in my opinion, right? I think we need to do succession planning at all levels within the organization. I mean, we need to be ready, right? We are businesses, and we need to ensure that we have continuity in our business. And in order to do that, we need to have continuity at every role that we have within the organization. And so we cannot just look at succession planning at your executive team level, because we're going to completely miss other critical roles within our organization. So a specific example here, Brad, is yes, we have our top leaders, but we have critical skills in innovation company like Eastman is. We have critical roles such as subject matter experts, and I absolutely need to have a succession plan for those subject matter experts, because if I don't have them, I'm going to have a gap if they decide to go and lead their career somewhere else than in my shop. And so subject matter experts are critically important in our succession planning and talent planning. It's one of the core group that we look at from a succession plan standing point. We also need to be able to identify at all levels of the organization who is the successor to John if John decides to leave, even if they're earlier on during their career. Who do I need to recruit on campus, right, on college campuses, to come and feed that pipeline of talent within the organization in an ideal way? And I'm not saying anything here to those of you who are attending this podcast, is we absolutely need, in order to move the boat of the organization together with the business, we need to be able to have strong pipelines at every single role within the organization. Also, another reason is we need to tell our folks at every level in the organization, if your wish is to attain this role, right, where I see you going, those are the skills that you need to develop. Those are the competencies that you need to own before I put you in that next role. So career planning, I think, is critical from the moment you enter an organization all the way to the top.
Couldn't agree more. I think all great points. Another question we got from Su Yang. I knew we would get this question in some form or fashion, because we seem to always do when we talk about succession planning, which is, how much information do we really want to share with candidates? In other words, how transparent do we really want to be in terms of letting people know whether or not they're a high potential, or broadcasting that information throughout the organization? Again, I've seen organizations all over the map on this, trying to keep it a very secretive, so even the candidates themselves don't know, others making it very open. I think there's always arguments on both sides. Where do you land in terms of how much transparency to really embrace?
Well, I believe that when people are quote unquote high potential, right, they kind of sort of know it. They are the ones that we invest the most in, the ones that we spend the most of the time with. Not to say that we don't spend enough time with the others, but in terms of transparency, transparency is dangerous because you set expectations, and the business is changing, and the expectations of the business are changing too. So if I tell Lisa, hey, you are my successor, then you kind of set it in stones. What I would rather say is, you are on my succession plan, and I see you having the potential to get to the role that I have, those are the gaps that you need to fill, right? By the way, I'm also going nowhere, Lisa. And so until I go somewhere else, you right away tomorrow, even if you have all the same skill as I have, to move into that position if that position doesn't exist. And so, what I think is super important is to be honest with our employees and say you're trending towards a different position, or you're trending towards having an opportunity in another business. You're trending towards a leadership opportunity, but those are the skills that you need to gain or the skills that you need to develop in order to get there. And let me help you as your leader to work on those gaps that I see.
Great points. A couple other good questions coming in. One from Julio, kind of suggesting that a lot of the leaders they see are maybe focused, or maybe any talent, are focused on their next role as opposed to the role that they're currently in. So how do we keep people, certainly people are looking ahead, looking at what that next role they want to aspire to or work towards or get, but at the same time, setting realistic expectations for the speed of movement or how quickly people can move within our organizations.
So, Brad, I touched on that a little bit, saying that if there is no role open and there are people who have just been promoted into that next role that could be also for you, and there is no role open, right? So we all have organizations that are built, like a pyramid where you have, a head of a department or one CEO, and there's tons of people who aspire to get to that job. What I like to see is people navigating their career with lateral moves, right? In order to keep on developing their skill set as enterprise leaders rather than just silo, this is where I want to get to. So that's one element. There's one thing I want to highlight too here is we're talking about succession planning, we're talking about leadership, we're talking about going up and moving up and moving up. But let's talk about all the employees within our organization who are just fine, doing a very good job at doing their job. And this is the bulk. This is 80% of our population. And don't quote me. Well, no, somebody's going to quote me on the 80%. But I really think that there is value to developing your skills on staying relevant in your area of expertise. I think there's tremendous value at rewarding our employees who are doing a very good job at doing their job today, and that's what they want to do, and that's also completely fair. So some portion of the population will want to move super duper fast. I get it, but there's a level of maturity that you only acquire and a level of knowledge that you only acquire by moving laterally through an organization before moving up. And I've seen that story play before, people being a lot more successful when they take the time to really own their skills, to really perform at their best in one area of the business, transfer their skills laterally in a different area of the business once, twice, three times. And I see them being more successful in the long term than the one who cut too many steps within their careers and aspire to move too fast. For example, leading teams is very complex. And when you become a leader of an organization, having on top of your day to day, having to lead a team is a very different skill set that you need to sharpen. I'm a true believer that you need to own the skills, your own skills first before you start sharpening those leadership skills and manage others within your team. So my advice to younger professionals is to say don't go too fast, right? Don't go too fast because at some point where are you going to go?
I think I had a similar thought earlier when you were talking about the need to think about succession planning at all levels and all roles of the organization. The fact that a lot of those individuals may not ever move up or want to move up within an organization, but it's still important to have those career development conversations with them to figure out how they can continue to engage, grow, develop in their roles, contribute to the organization in ways that are meaningful to them. So I really like the idea of thinking about this as not just vertical, but also lateral movement, lattice type models of career development that have been popularized in recent years. Another really good question from down under, a viewer in Australia, but we've been talking about rethinking succession planning. So if we rethink it, how do we know we're doing better? So the question is really around how do we measure the effectiveness of our succession planning efforts? So within Eastman or other organizations you've worked in, what are the key metrics that you really use as a barometer to know whether what you're doing is building those really rich talent pipelines within your company?
Well, the bigger question is, why is somebody from Australia awake already?
That's a good one.
Because with the time difference, right? I think that's a question to be asked. And thinking about talent management at 4 o'clock in the morning, it doesn't seem very digestible. But okay, with that set aside, how do we measure that we're effective? Well, we measure that we're effective if we don't have to rely too much on talent acquisition, and part of my shop is probably just screaming right now. But we have to measure the effectiveness of our succession plans is 2 elements. I think is it's healthy for an organization to go and get talent from the outside to bring new ideas, right? Innovation, innovative ideas, other ways of looking at the world, different experience. So that is very important. But in order to keep your talent within the organization, we cannot be in a situation where every time we have an open job, we go and get somebody from the outside. That is the one criteria that's very important and that we measure all the time, is to look at, hey, if we have an open position, we better have some people who are lining up that we have prepared year after year to get to that open position. So to address your question directly, how do we measure that our succession plans are effective is by the amount of successors that we have for each of the key roles that we have highlighted as important within our own organization. I think what's healthy is to have a couple of roles, a couple of people that are so nimble that they can be ready now, to jump in if you have an open role. I think it's healthy too to have 1 or 2 people who are ready within a year or 2, right? More or less, saying, hey, they're not 100% ready, but close to being ready. And you should have a stronger basis of people who are ready longer term, right? And those folks who are ready longer terms may be those ones that connect the dots to what we were saying earlier, Brad. Those people that are longer terms, they're the ones that you need to move laterally through the organization to gain other skills. But I think in order to know if your succession plans are healthy, you have to look at first, do I have any successors? Because then that's a failure of the system if you have none. You have to look at having 2 or 3 solid people within now and 3 years that are almost ready and that you're grooming literally to getting ready to get onto the succession plan of all your key roles.
I think those are all great metrics. And it reminds me of a company I worked with at one point. They actually, on the idea of filling roles more internally as opposed to externally, they actually set a goal of they wanted to fill 80%, 4 out of every 5 roles with internal candidates. They're willing to go outside, 1 out of 5 times when necessary, either to bring in, like you said, new ideas, experience, expertise, or they just maybe didn't have that person that was ready now. But actually set that really specific numerical target. And if they started dropping below that 80%, then it suggested that their talent pipelines maybe weren't as robust as they really needed them to be.
And Brad, I would want to add that you also need in talent management overall, right? So I lead the talent recruitment here also at Eastman, and I have phenomenal partner in TA and great leaders. And what they do is they scope the market all the time. So, although we have succession plans, they know the skills that are most in demand on the market. They can anticipate what we're going to need before we even know that we need them. And so, I really like that collaboration with our talent partners, our recruitment partners, and our HR partners to also always have an eye on the outside saying, hey, I have my succession plans. Yes, I do. Hey, I met that extraordinary candidate while doing recruitment for X, Y, and Z. And this is a talent that we need to bring into our organization. And so that shifts, a little bit your succession plans because all of a sudden you bring quote unquote new blood into your organization. And so it adds one element to your succession plans. To the point you were making earlier, having 4 out of 5 roles. Ideally, yes, I love that metric, but I don't know how effective we can be at mapping talent that precisely. I really want to say that everything we do in talent management is both an art and a science, but very often it's an art. And it's the art of having that human connection. It's the art of having that continuous communication with business leaders, and our HR partners do that very well. They understand the business so well that they can say, hey, but we haven't thought about this person or the skill set that they can bring. How about we give them a chance and put them on succession planning too?
Well, I love the point you just made there around the connections between succession planning, career development, and other areas like talent acquisition. It's something I always try to highlight when I teach learning and development that doesn't sit in a bubble, right? It's obviously impacted by what you're doing and what the labor market looks like and what you're doing with talent acquisition, how effective you are at retaining talent, et cetera. So I think those are important points that we can't lose sight of. So I know we're running up on our time, so we've covered a ton of ground. So before we close here, I'd just love to give you an opportunity to maybe leave the audience with, a few takeaways that you think are really most critical for people to think about as they rethink succession planning within their own organizations.
So, the biggest point I think we've made, both you and I, is all the conversations start with the employee in the middle. They are the ones who really drive their career. They are on the steering wheel, and everybody else can help them get to where they want to go. But they have to be the ones to be vocal and say, this is where I want to go. This is the skills that I have, and help me get there. And then we're going to help them get there, right? One point that we make too is around that HR data. Our HR data is sometimes inconsistent, it is incomplete, it is sometimes biased. And if we have all that HR data that's everywhere, right, it becomes unreliable. And every single AI tool that we're going to throw at it will be unreliable. I believe that in order to use AI in succession planning, we need to have those foundational elements in place, right? One of that big one is that talent data we talked about. AI models depend on reliable information, whether it's in HR or any other businesses. And so, with that reliable information about employee skills, their performance, their career history, their learning activity, their leadership behaviors, without all that data captured somewhere, AI cannot exist. Another point we made is that clarity around competency framework, right? So AI cannot identify leadership potential or readiness unless the company has defined what good leadership looks like or what good talent looks like. And so for that, we need that competency framework to set the strategy of talent, right? So that means articulating clearly the capabilities, clearly and simply, right? I insist heavily on simple. So those competency framework needs to remain simple and consistent through your entire organization. Let's forget about the jargon and the this and the that. I really think that we need to articulate capabilities, experience, and behavior clearly based on a distinct framework for future roles. And finally, right, um, in talent management, in HR in general, in leadership in general, what's most critical in terms of skill set, right, when we look at succession planning, when we look at talent mapping, is the strong human judgment. So all the AI tools in the world can help us do our job faster, surface some insights, highlight some patterns, suggest some development opportunities. But at the end of the day, right, all those decisions about leadership succession or about succession in general, they need to remain a human responsibility. I do not see a world where we're going to remove the human from making those decisions for the organization.
I hope you're right. I hope we never remove the human. They should always be part of the decision-making process. Well, Penelope, this has been a wonderful discussion. I hope that all of you that joined us today got as much out of it as I actually did. It was very insightful for me as well. For those of you that want to continue to learn more in this series, this Future Ready Workforce series, the next session is coming up on July 8th. It will be called The Power of Advocacy, Cultivating Mentors, Sponsors, and Stakeholders. So that'll be led by my colleague, J.R. Keller from the ILR School, and Melody Kelleher, who is Vice President, Talent Empowerment at Baker Hughes. So strongly encourage you to register for that session. Again, Penelope, thank you for joining us today, for sharing your expertise. Tons of valuable insights and takeaways for our audience. And again, thank you for all of you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at a future Cornell keynote. Thank you.
Thank you.